Welcome, Senate Corporations. Roll call.
Senator Boner,
Excused.
Senator Case,
Present.
Senator Nethercott,
Excused.
Senator Scott,
Here.
and Chairman Driscoll.
Here.
3 present, 2 excused.
Have a quorum. This morning we'll take up House Bill 87, Insurance Investment Amendments, House Bill 80, Campaign Reports Amendments, House Bill 52, Timeline to Prepare and Process Absentee Ballots. We've got a couple other if we have time. Insurance Investment Amendments, House Bill 87. Senator Rothfuss, would you like to present? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, appreciate the opportunity to present Insurance Investment Amendments, House Bill 87, which is the interim work of the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation Technology. And Mr. Chairman, you're used to these being blockchain bills. This is actually more on the financial technology side. And again, we were during the interim last year, and you may recall this, towards the end of the interim, there was interest in trying to explore ways to improve our statutes with regard to some types of insurance, and particularly reinsurance, and making sure that we had a modernized statutory approach. There wasn't time ahead of the prior session to get legislation put together that really accomplished that task. But during the interim, we worked this topic and had a couple of pieces of legislation come out from that. One was the insurance sandbox, which we've already worked through. The other is this insurance investment amendments, which is generally applicable, but was really thought through to modernize what permissible investments there are to ensure that we were sort of at the best practice and most appropriate statutory level and construct so that we would look attractive potentially to whether it's reinsurers or other larger insurance companies based on their investment profiles. And Mr. Chairman, I would invite the Insurance Commission, or excuse me, the Insurance Department to come up and join me and maybe walk through. I'll give a high level discussion, but have them walk through the specifics, because most of what really took place was a refinement of our permissible investment statutes that they went back and forth with stakeholders on to ensure that we got to a point where we were still appropriately managing risk and distributing risk, but doing it in a way that provided more flexibility to interested parties, whether that's a reinsurer or honestly, whether it's our existing domestic corporations, which you'll hear from as supporters as well, because it provides them with more flexibility while not increasing the risk for the portfolio. So with that, I'd ask the Commissioner to walk through and provide you what we did.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Jeff Root. I'm the Insurance Commissioner. With me is Ms. Johnson, the Deputy Commissioner. This bill is really the result of our department working with an individual who wanted to redomesticate a reinsurer in Wyoming. When we started, we thought we might have to come up with a whole new complete statute, section in the statute to deal with reinsurers. It turned out that what we needed to do was update some of our investment statutes and just modernize them, which we had done. And we'd seen this in other states, and there's some things that just weren't contemplated in 1985 when these statutes were put together, and we've got products out there now that are fairly reasonable. And so I'll have Ms. Johnson walk through some of the specifics for you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Linda Johnson, the Deputy Commissioner with the Insurance Department. And do you want me to walk through the entire bill with the definitions and everything, or just focus on the investment products?
Ms. Johnson, if you would, at least from a chairman's perspective,
Okay.
just a thumbnail of kind of where it's at, and we'll flesh it out via questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the bottom of page 1, so that's section 1 of the bill. If you go over to page 2, we're adding 5 definitions to section 102 here. And so on line 9, we're adding definition of domestic jurisdiction. And by the way, these definitions are taken from NEIC model language. So we didn't make these definitions up. They're in NEIC model investment laws. So on line 9, we're defining domestic jurisdiction. On line 13, defining foreign jurisdiction. And then on line 16 of page 2, we're defining foreign investment. And this is a little more lengthy definition, and it goes over to page 4. And then on line 10, we're defining high-grade investment. And on line 14, we're defining securities valuation office. So those are the 5 definitions we're adding just to clarify some of the changes and the additions that we're making here to the chapter 7. And so on line 20, section 103, here we're just wordsmithing because again, now we're defining foreign jurisdiction. So at the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5, we're just again changing country to jurisdiction. And then on line 7, section 106 on page 5, this is where we're adding some different investments and limitations. So section 6 deals with the diversification of and limits on investments. So right now, in general, domestic insurers can only invest up to 5% of their assets in any one corporation or entity. That's to, make sure they're diversified and not all of their eggs are in one basket. And what we're doing in section 106 at the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6, we're increasing the 5% limit to 10% for investments in diversified mutual funds, because by their nature, those mutual funds are diversified. So it's not like all your eggs are in one basket. Those mutual funds invest in a bunch of different companies. So we're increasing that limit from 5% to 10%. And like I say, that goes on to the top of page 6. And then on page 6.
Do you mind if I interrupt?
Their case.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Johnson, is all of this still kind of model NAIC stuff?
Mr. Chairman, so we have probably an older version of the NEIC
guessing.
model investment laws. They've made changes to them over the years, and we haven't necessarily updated our code for everything that's in those model investment laws, but we're not doing anything outside of what other states have done. Like I did some research on the limitations, and 22 states in general are like us and have the 5% limitation on any one investment. 15 states go up to 10%. 8 states don't have a provision. They have what's known as a prudent person model investment law, where it's just as long as the investments are what a prudent person would do. They don't have the defined limits version. The NAIC has several model investment laws that you can choose from. So and in the past, I'm assuming what our state has done is done a little bit of the defined limits version. Like I say, it doesn't have everything that's in the NAIC model, but it has the limitations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So on the bottom of page 6, well, on lines 14 through 16, we're deleting some language here, but we're actually not deleting it. We're just moving it to better organize it within the statutes. So we're actually moving it to page 8, lines 14 through 16. So I'll discuss that when we get to page 8. But at the bottom of page 6, line 18, we're adding Roman numeral 17 to include obligations issued by any solvent corporation in a foreign jurisdiction other than an insurance company that are traded in the United States on U.S. exchanges denominated in U.S. dollars and subject to U.S. Securities laws. So this is now being added as an allowable investment. And the phrase for these are Yankee bonds is what they're generally referred to. And these do have to be, if you go over to page 7, the top of page 7, these do have to be high grade investments. And again, they are also subject to the 5% limitation per investment. And then on line 4, we're adding Roman numeral 18, which are interests in a partnership or limited liability company. And this is if the insurer has $100 million or more in surplus and a total adjusted capital that is at least 5 times its authorized control level risk-based capital. So basically a risk-based capital percentage of 500%. Regulators start getting nervous when the risk-based capital percentage drops to around 200%. So we wanted to open up these types of investments just to the larger, more well-capitalized companies, because partnerships and limited liability company investments tend to be your hedge funds, which are a little more risky. They may not be as liquid. You may not be able to get out of them for a few years. So again, we just wanted to open up these types of investments to the larger, more well-capitalized companies that have a little more buffer there. And again, these would be subject to 5% per investment and then an aggregate of 10%. So And then on line 15 of page 7, we're adding Roman numeral 19. And this adds securities issued by an exchange traded fund, provided that they meet the 4 following conditions that are labeled A through D. And those continue on to page 8. And exchange traded funds, they're referred to as ETFs, and they've been very common. They're kind of like a mutual fund. And then if you go over to page 8, on line 14 through 16, this letter B, this is the language that we deleted on page 6, and we're just adding it here to kind of separate it. And again, this is existing language in our statute. It just says that at any one time, the aggregate amount of foreign investments shall not exceed 20% of the insurer's admitted assets. And that's a change I believe we made in the early 2000s. So. And then if you go to the bottom of page 8, line 18, miscellaneous loans and investments, we refer to this internally as the bucket clause. And if you go to page 9, what we're doing here again is we're giving the larger, more well-capitalized companies a little more flexibility with their investments, so they can have up to 10% of their assets in these types of investments with a 2% per investment limit. Right now, everyone can invest in these miscellaneous loans or investments, and what those are, basically they're anything that's not expressly permitted in Chapter 7. So they could be different things that we just haven't thought of. So again, currently companies can invest up to 5% of their assets into these miscellaneous investments with a limit of 1% per investment. And what we're doing is we're increasing that to 10% with a 2% limit per investment for those larger, well-capitalized companies that have the 100 million in surplus and the 500% RBC ratio. Again, just to give those larger companies a little more flexibility. And then at the bottom of page 9, line 17, now we're moving into chapter 24 of the insurance code, which deals with how our domestic companies are organized and some of the corporate governance requirements that they have to follow. And one of these requirements is that they have to have their assets in Wyoming. And I know with everything being electronic, that sounds kind of archaic, but if you talk to any receiver who's had to put a company into liquidation, it's very helpful to have all those assets in one jurisdiction rather than going to several different states to gather up those assets to pay policyholder claims. So we don't have a problem with this statute. However, in talking to our domestics when we're going through and updating these statutes, one of the issues came up that there's not always a lot of competition with financial institutions in the state that can provide the adequate technology and competitive fee structures that they need to do their financial reporting. So we wanted to give them an avenue to be able to request permission from the commissioner to move those assets to an out-of-state custodian if warranted. And we put in guardrails. You know, they have to show that there are no financial institutions in the state of Wyoming that can provide this service. And so right now, I'll tell you, all 4 of our domestics do have their assets in Wyoming financial institutions. But just as an example, and I know the domestics can speak to this better than I can, but when we talk about the technology that the financial institutions have to have, every year, our domestics have to report to us every single investment that they own. And for every single investment, and I know you can't see this, but there's 18 columns of information for every stock and bond that they own. So the financial institutions help with that reporting and the software packages so that they're not manually typing all of this information. So you can imagine a $700 million company or 700 million in assets. There's going to be a lot of these pages in the annual statement. So again, we just wanted an avenue for the companies to be able to, ask for permission to move the assets out of state if there is not a financial institution that has a physical location in Wyoming that can handle the reporting requirements. And then also we put in guardrails for calling those assets back. If the company's experiencing some financial trouble, we have the ability to make them bring their assets back to Wyoming. And then with that, over on page 10, the act is effective July 1st of 2022.
Questions for Ms. Johnson? Questions for Ms. Johnson? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, for Ms. Johnson or for the commissioner, how would you feel if we were, in view of what's going on today, to add a black prohibition against investing in any Russian
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, at this point, we would be neutral on such a matter. We would be Switzerland, Senator Scott, who actually isn't neutral. I take that back. We would have to truly be neutral. No, we would not have a problem with it if I would let the domestics speak. I don't know off the top of my head what their portfolios contain that are tied into Russia.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, follow up.
And that, if we did that, it basically would apply to our domestics, would it not?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
If we put a prohibition on investing in Russian assets in, that would apply to our domestics, would it not? And not the ones that aren't our domestics?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that is correct.
Senator Case? Oh, Senator Scott, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and these, would such a prohibition mean that they couldn't have an admitted asset? Although if they had one, they could have it as a non-admitted asset till got rid of it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that's a good point, because anything that they have that we find is too risky or which would be prohibited by statute, we could just exclude from their bottom line. So that is an option.
Senator Case, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, that sounds pretty good, and I definitely see a lot of reaction to that, but I don't even think the bill title allows that. It's kind of like a big policy change to say, we're going to start striking out these countries, and that could be like a bill with a separate subject, perhaps, to restrict. Well, let me finish. So I just think it's kind of a bad policy to do this. I'm as mad at Russians as anybody on the planet right now, but why would we pick this bill and hang that on it when there are lots and lots of statutes that have investment requirements and just nobody's going to want to invest in anything Russian right now anyway. There's just no way. The way the ruble's falling, and it's going to be a disaster. I urge us not to go down this road.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, if you look at the first 3 lines of the title, amending requirements for eligible and authorized investments by domestic insurance companies, including investments in foreign jurisdictions. The title is very much open to it. And Mr. Chairman, it probably won't have big effect with our domestics, but I think it will possibly start a trend and send a message that we're capable of sending and dealing with.
Further comments? I have one. We've watched this happen with our oil and gas industry. And it's terrifying to go down this path that we're going to politically choose investments for companies. The stability of the company is based on their investments. And I'm with it. I don't think we're going to make any Russian investments, but I've watched other states batter our domestic industries by the same method, and it really scares the heck out of me. Another cop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where it is the session for political pandering, and whereas I think all 90 of us have a real concern over Russian aggression and the illegal takeover of Ukraine, I hesitate for we as the Corporations Committee in the Wyoming Legislature to start participating in global politics. Why don't we leave that to the sanctions that are being applied globally, as opposed to making rash decisions for political points out of, again, emotional desire. If we had the ability, I think, to harm Russia, I would hope we probably could, but I think it would warrant further deliberate discussions that this bill is not intended to address. So let's get back on the bill. Let's get back to insurance. It's good to see you, Department of Insurance. Can you bring us back to ground?
That may be the only time I've ever heard that statement, Senator, but we appreciate it.
Good to see you.
That is true. But having said that, we're happy to answer any other questions you may have on this. We worked, like we said, with the individual in this past year, and I think I think it's necessary, and I think it's a good upgrade for what we've had on statute.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I guess, looking at this updating of investments, which piece is the blockchain piece? Are they just kind of companions? I mean, where does that come in?
Mr. Chairman, to address that, it's blockchain, financial technology, and digital innovation technology is the name of the select committee. This one did come from blockchain interest in trying to get blockchain and innovative technologies into the insurance sector. That's where the conversation began. But as the conversation progressed, it really came down to, well, what is actually needed is some upgrades to the permissible investments to provide opportunity for larger insurance companies that are well-heeled and probably in the reinsurance space to operate in Wyoming. So we went a long ways, honestly, from the beginning of the conversation to the point where this seems to be the most appropriate and needed solution. And I appreciate the hard work of the insurance commissioner and the stakeholders that engaged in the process through the interim. There was an awful lot of meetings, and this was presented several times and upgraded and iterated through. So at this point in time, it's entirely neutral on whether you're dealing with digital assets or blockchain or exchange tracking funds or anything else. It's
I'll make a
more
statement
general.
and try to turn it into a question. They actually reached out to us last year and said, look, this is what I'm all about. And I don't care what committee brings. It's how do we reform our regulations to bring business back into the state. And we actually had reinsurance companies that said, look, we'll bring millions of dollars in people into the state if we can tweak the law. Our insurance commissioner and his staff were phenomenally said, yeah, it works for us. And to me, this is exactly what we need to be doing rather than a lot of the other stuff is how do we make ourselves attractive to some of these outside companies and still maintain our high standards? I applaud you folks for doing what you've done because I think this is going to bring jobs and money into the state. Is that true?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As a member of the committee, I think it's important to recognize, I think, the special sophistication that the committee has and the history of the committee of really looking at things in a new and innovative way and lends itself to this conversation. Again, it started off very much appropriately within the fintech space and understanding how that could be explored in Wyoming. And it originated from those stakeholders who took an interest in our committee work and saw that as an opportunity to leverage. And so I would support, the substance of the bill as opposed to which committee is bringing forward the work to try to better Wyoming.
Any further questions for the Commissioner, Senator Rothfuss? Thank you. Appreciate your work. Anyone in the audience like to testify on this bill? Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sandra Adam. I'm the Comptroller of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. So we are one of the 4 domestic companies here in Wyoming. And we are on the health side of the industry. And we just wanted to come and show our support of this bill and see if there was any questions you would have for us at this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further testimony in the audience? Do we have anybody online? Public testimony is closed. We have a due pass. Any comments or debate on the bill? Question being called, roll call.
On House Bill 87, Senator Boner, Senator Case, Senator Nethercott, Senator Scott, and Chairman Driscoll. That would be 5 ayes, do pass.
Thank you.
We're going to see the Russian amendment on the floor.
Tune up on your Russian. Okay, next up's House Bill 80. I'll go ahead and just start unless we have somebody in the audience or committee that wants to present it. It's a pretty simple bill. Campaign reports amendments. Jump into page 2 on it. We've got a strikeout. Says, when you look at the section at the middle of page 2, line 6, except otherwise provided in this section, any political action committee, candidates campaign committee, or any political action committee formed under law of another state contributes to Wyoming PAC or to a candidates campaign committee. And then we strike out which expends any fund in any primary, general, or special election shall file an itemized statement of contributions. That's back to your off election cycle, says they're going to do it regardless. Go back, and then on the last page, on page 3, used to be a $500 fine. There's a case out there that's gone on. You pay $500 and smile and say, thank you very much. I'll continue to violate your law. This says it's 500, and we've added in per day, beginning on the date the final order and ending when the report is filed. So what it says is when you've been told to cease and desist and quit on it, and you don't, it's $500 a day, not a one-time $500 fine. And that's the substance of the bill. Yes, I'm the one. Do we have anybody in the audience that wants to testify on it? Anyone online? Discussion committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case, I knew you were coming.
Well, I just wonder where the Secretary of State's office is. Do they know about this?
They've got to have some monitored bills. I didn't call them. I'm guilty of that.
Well,
No, I don't think you have to call them.
no.
I never have. So.
Yeah.
Just go take it in perspective. So it's a corporations committee bill. I think we heard from them in the interim on this topic. So it might be that they don't feel the need to opine again.
Maybe. I guess we assume that.
Yeah. Oh, here's Guy.
Hey,
Maybe they do feel the need to opine on it.
look at this. Are your ears burning? Just walk up to the desk. Welcome. We're on 80. I did the presentation on the bill. We're down to your thoughts on particularly the $500 a day fine and where it falls. So you can ask us questions or back up and testify at whatever level you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning. House Bill 80 is a
Please
pretty,
identify yourself.
oh, thank you. Kai Schoen, Election Director in the Secretary of State's office. House Bill 80 is a pretty simple bill and what it achieves. The language that is stricken in it is really to provide a uniformity in how PACs and candidate committees file their reports. This really became an issue, or to our knowledge, I should say, when we received the authority to assess civil penalties. When there was a filing that didn't happen, we could assess that $500 penalty, which I guess we'll talk about here in just in a sec as well. And we had a particular PAC that had formed in 2020, just prior to the general election, and they never filed. And so our system alerted them that they had a missed filing, and we got to the point where they missed their 21-day grace period to file the report. And so we generated an administrative order. And we worked with the Attorney General on it, and they found this section of law and said, well, did they expend any funds? And we're like, we don't know. We have no way of knowing. But yet in the past, 2 decades, at least to my knowledge, the way it has functioned and the precedent has been, if you formed a candidate committee, if you formed a political action committee, you would file. And there's many reports where they would have, 0 contributions, 0 expenditures. And maybe some of you on this committee here have filed a report where you've checked the box in our online system that says, I have no contributions or expenditures to report. And so you just say, I have nothing to essentially report. And so that language that exists there makes it impossible really for new committees that have never participated in an election. And so simply by striking that language, it continues the procedure that's been in place, really, like I said, for decades, that hasn't come up until we've had this authority to assess civil penalties. And so it makes it uniform for all PACs and committees. The $500, I believe it says per day. Yeah, that was, I believe, an amendment that took place during the interim. And the way that's written, just for the committee's knowledge, and you maybe know this already, is that it applies to all entities, including candidates. This is for statewide offices, so legislative and our 5 electeds. And I believe the genesis of this was to get at organizations, is how I think I understood this to be initially. And there's another bill, I believe, for the committee's consideration here in a bit that has some similar language that was also geared towards organizations, making sure they get their filings on time. And with that, I would answer certainly any questions the committee would have for me.
Committee question for Sean. I have one. What happens if they don't pay? I know candidates in both is you assess them 500 a day for 50 days, because usually when they don't do it, they just go dark. What's the process? Is it just a debt out there to the state, or do we have an enforcement arm to go collect this?
Mr. Chairman, excellent question. We haven't had to go down that road yet. We've only had so far one political action committee that we did give this administrative order to that paid it. In fact, the PAC I was mentioning to prior did have activity. They just weren't paying attention to any emails. They weren't being in communication. So they owned up, they paid it, all was well. But there is, and I don't have the law right in front of me, the existing statute, but for statewide entities, it goes to the Attorney General to then collect those fees. It could be garnishing wages. It could be a variety of different ways. And I believe that's the same on the county side with the district or county attorney to use those vehicles to get those monies.
Thank you. One follow-up. Can you do cease and desist on advertising and flyers and such things if they're non-compliance, or should we have something in there that says you're out of compliance? Now we can stop you from proceeding further, because this is what I see as a real methodology to stop bad actors from doing the wrong thing. And if they just thumb you and continue to go, should there be something in the law to deal with that?
Mr. Chairman, that's kind of a tough one to answer. I don't know if that's one better for the attorneys to weigh in on, because I suppose it would have to be determined first that it was in fact an electioneering communication or an independent expenditure. And so I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question.
Questions? Senator Scott.
Two questions. One, the provision, page 3, lines 14 through 17. Does that apply just to these out-of-state outfits that aren't filing, or is this to everybody? Suppose I have an opponent who slips up and doesn't bother to file. Are you going to charge him $500 a day?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, it applies to everybody. So in that scenario, yes, it would compound $500 a day.
Mr. Chairman, I suddenly have reservations about this bill. The problem, if you're going to apply it to everybody, and we do have a problem with candidates for legislative and lesser offices not getting the word and not filing. And I think you could catch some people who should know better, but they don't. And they don't realize the consequences if they have lost the election in particular. I'm a little afraid that automatically sticking them 500 a day, about the first time you do that against somebody, you're going to have a chilling effect on people filing all over the place. Mr. Chairman, further question. If we said up to $500 a day, do you need to have the certainty or just the possibility of going to a higher fee if somebody is really recalcitrant?
Sean.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I may not fully understand your question, but one thing to mention that may address some of your concern as well is it's not listed in this bill, but in current statute, for those that again don't file, they do have 21 days to get it in before that even begins this $500 penalty. And following that, the way this is written, it would be $500 a day. During that time of 21 days to get things filed, after the 21 days, when there's an administrative order, they can request reconsideration from our office. They have 20 days to do that. And so if they had their report filed and they demonstrated good cause, it would waive the $500 penalty, and that would include how many days they hadn't filed that. So
What what I'm thinking of is on page 3, line 14, after the little I, to just insert the words up to $500 per day, which I think would give you discretion to charge lesser amounts. And I'm thinking 2 reasons for it. One, so that you can have some ability to deal with a candidate for a lesser office, really, who doesn't understand, doesn't get the word, and something goes wrong and you don't get a report. Some flexibility there to keep this from being too chilling. And the other would be if you're dealing with a major outfit that has been troublesome, give you some ability to settle for a lesser amount to get the thing done. And I'm just asking Mr. Chairman, I'm just not proposing an amendment at this time yet, but I'm asking. his
Got
opinion.
to follow. Senator Nethercott? Or we'll let Sean do
Yeah,
that.
just, Mr. Sean, do you think that the Secretary of State's office currently with this bill, you have that ability to have that discretion? Or do you need that language?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I don't believe we have that discretion currently. It's just $500, period. And Senator Scott, to your question as well, my only concern with that additional language is how do we determine, working through, is it going to be $100 for this day or for this committee or that? So there's some discretion there, which I understand, but to uniformly apply that in a consistent manner that's fair is just a bit of a concern.
Mr. Sean, can you, I think I've got a little different understanding than Senator Scott. Can you list the timelines a little clearer and then talk about how the order actually works? Because it appears to me that I don't file my report. I'm a candidate. I don't file it. I pay no attention. And you guys send me a letter that says, look, 21 days is about to expire, which I've worked with your office, so I know how good your staff is at following up on that. Haven't done it. Still, the $500 fine doesn't kick in until you say, look, we're sending you a final letter that's administrative order. Now you've had fair warning that the fine's coming at you. I personally think that's pretty fair warning that you've had 21 days, you've had a letter now, but if you could flesh out the timeline and how the administrative letters work, I would appreciate it. And the appeal process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the way the process works, it was a new law that was put in place. I want to say it was 2 years ago or so. And it's really a pretty gracious approach, if you will, to how this works. So if you miss the filing, starting the immediate day thereafter, the 21 days kick in to where you have those 21 days, those 3 weeks to get your report filed with no penalty whatsoever. At the end of those 21 days, the day following that, we would then get together the administrative orders and send those out. The moment they're sent out, not when it's received, when they're sent out, that's when really they have 20 days to request reconsideration, but the civil penalty stays at that point until they were to request reconsideration and also have their report filed. And so that's currently how that works. If they don't file the report and the 21 days passed, then there is an accruing fee to that $500. And I don't remember exactly how it works, but it does grow.
Another cut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we might be overthinking this, but so I'm 22 days, I get my order saying, file the report, you're getting assessed $500 a day. 5 days later, I file my motion for reconsideration and file my report. And I ask for the fees to be, the penalty not to be assessed. Does the Secretary of State's office have that ability to say, okay, you filed your report, your motion for reconsideration, you filed your report, we're not going to then assess you $2,500.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Endicott, thank you for asking the question that way. We do have that authority to waive that civil penalty.
Any further questions, Sean? Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. It helped a lot.
Thank you.
And
Senator Nethercott.
just to follow up on this discussion, and so based on Senator Scott's proposal, because I see the wisdom of, in that circumstance, potentially levying a fee or penalty of some sort, maybe not the $2,500, but maybe not zero either. And so do you feel like the Secretary of State's office has that ability to reduce the penalty? Or do you think it would be prudent for us to provide that flexibility in this bill draft? So that there is, you know, some accountability associated with that delay? Just a question.
Sean.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, we currently, we don't have any flexibility the way it currently is. So if that would be the pleasure of the committee to offer that flexibility to our office, then I would think it would require some kind of an amendment here.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
I'm kind of confused because Senator Nethercott's earlier question, you sort of said you could waive it if, so is it like a 0-1 thing? You can either waive it or assess it all. Is that what we're talking about here? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Good questions. Sean. Senator Nethercott.
Just a quick question, and maybe it's something we come back around to or work with the Secretary of State's office later. What I've heard also you say, and I understand that concern, is you don't want too much discretion because you don't want to be in the place of making disparate decisions concerning different political entities. Should be equal across the board every time, but that ability to waive it entirely still affords that discretion. So it's a level of how much discretion you feel comfortable with.
Sean.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, tough questions. And certainly, I mean, I obviously with the staff that we have and with our secretary, I don't have any doubt that we would be able to, you know, enforce this in a way that is uniform, in a way that makes sense, a way that is fair. There was just a general concern is all. Certainly campaign finance, and when we throw all entities, including organizations, into the mix, it can be a little bit litigious. So.
Good question. Senator Boner.
And just to follow up on that discussion, is it possible to maybe within your rules, set up a standard procedure or set up some guidelines that do give it a sense of fairness and objectivity within the confines of the current bill?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, currently we don't have that specific rulemaking authority on this. If we had that particular authority, then we could certainly put it in rule to make it uniform. That would be an option.
Good questions, committee. Thank you. Anyone in the audience wish to testify? Anyone online? Public testimony is closed. Committee? Bills moved. Discussion and amendments.
Mr. Chairman, we have to fix something with the penalty. I kind of like Senator Scott's proposal and up to, otherwise I really can't support this bill. It could just catch. So.
Mr. Chairman, I don't share those concerns.
You just don't or do?
I don't.
Okay.
I mean, the 21-day period is a significant amount of time. And then after that, if the entity or individual then files a motion for reconsideration and files the report, right? Then the ability of the Secretary of State's office to bring it back to zero exists, right? But there has to probably be a reasonable cause as to why, which I would imagine it would be, I didn't know, you know, and I'm so sorry and so embarrassed, and here's my report, please forgive me, which is probably going to be the case in most cases, right? I believe that the Secretary of State's office is not desiring to punish people and will more likely than not go to zero every time. And if they don't, right, I would imagine the facts are egregious, and that campaign report has never been filed. So I do think it's appropriate to give them discretion. And so the up to, I believe, does that. But I just think it's important to actually have teeth in the law. Otherwise, we can just go back to, I'll just pay the overhead of committing the crime, right? Of paying the $500 and who cares? I'll never file it. It is what it is. So there's got to be teeth to make it compliant.
I'm there, and I look at one other potential deal, and this gets pretty touchy when you start dealing with it, but there's a difference between candidates
Yeah.
and the outside end, because candidates, we've all seen, you get in a race, you give your $25 and you lose, and you really didn't spend any money and you didn't do much, and you just walk out the door and say, I quit, I'm done, and so what? Can't take my birthday away. There's no ill intent behind it. But with these packs that come from the outside, there is ill intent with it. We've seen that, we know about it. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't, and it might end up on the floor as an amendment, because I don't know how to structure it, but it's not shielding us as political people. It's differentiating the difference between a person running and a person that's trying to either help or defeat somebody outside of our system. And that's where I see it at, is we all know today, we've seen flyers, probably every one of us at this table have seen them that have come from somewhere else. I think they need dealt with extremely harshly. They're usually very often out of state, and they're very often detrimental to our system. So maybe someone else on the committee that's better at dividing these up splits the candidate deal out that says, look, if you are there, that fine really is waived to some degree if it wasn't egregious. And I don't know that, but lawyer?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's fine.
Okay.
I actually think the bill is fine. If we want to add the up to language. Okay, but I actually think it's fine. We're overthinking it. Again, the Secretary of State's office is overwhelmingly helpful, and so are the clerks to candidates, right? There is the option for them to put it back to zero. And if a candidate decides to run in a race, right, that this is not too onerous, right? Filing a campaign report. I think it's reasonable to conclude that no matter what office you're running for, you might have to file a campaign report, right, about your funding and expenditures. That's not a new concept in our system of democracy. Now, some of the nuances associated with when to file and how to file, again, there's flexibility to the Secretary of State's office about, failures to meet those timelines. And I think that that's prudent. I don't think that we need to keep, this is the consequence for failing to follow our laws concerning a free and fair democracy, right? With the ability to drop it to some zero. That's okay. This is okay.
I think it's good. I've got one question. I think you can probably answer it. Maybe. So this is candidates political filing as far as the political action committee. If a candidate just files in their own name, doesn't form it, are they still caught under this umbrella? They are. Okay, we have that. I see formula on it. So I'm good with the statement you made, Senator Nethercott. I'm open. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm tempted by Mr. Chairman's proposal as a little more sophisticated than what I had, a little better discriminating than what I had to start with. But I don't know quite how to word it just right on the spot. And I'm a potential no vote on the bill if we don't do anything. So I'm a little hung right now.
Question.
Question on the bill or question?
Question on the bill. I mean, Mr. Chairman, what I would say is if we can't come up with an amendment now, well, then we'll have 3 opportunities to bring an amendment later.
With the Corporations Committee.
I don't,
This is ridiculous.
I don't support one. I think the bill is fine.
Well, you haven't even heard one. We can offer an amendment.
Okay, go ahead.
We're ready.
I'll offer the one before. Up to.
Okay,
Second,
discussion.
question.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Done.
Question on the bill.
Passed. Question on the bill.
You know, we are the Corporations Committee. Why are you doing this? This is crazy. We can take our time. We don't have to like go like crazy. I'm happy to vote on the bill.
I'm happy to vote. I am open to what I talked
I
about.
thought we were a friendly committee.
But back to a committee. It's gonna take me some time to figure out where it fits in to potentially look at it. I'm fine with the bill the way it is. I'm also willing to look on one of our deals to come up with something, but I'm not able to do it. That was why I asked me.
Yeah,
Senator Boner.
And Mr. Chair, I'd offer another amendment that gives the Secretary of State's office rulemaking authority to determine how much the fine is going to be if it's between $0 and $500.
We just did that. Up to.
Okay, so it includes rulemaking authority.
No, but it, obviously they've got latitude with it.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Like that.
if we want to do a motion to we closed vote on the bill. Senator Boner wants to do a motion to allow for rulemaking authority. Perhaps we need to bring Mr. Sean back up, have a discussion about rulemaking authority associated with that. Let's keep working this bill. I know we
Sure. No, I'm
have
happy to.
2 more bills behind us, so I'm just trying to be,
Yeah, we're in no hurry. Ms.
But-
Johnson, come back up and we can visit a bit.
I think we.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Boner in entertaining the amendment of allowing our office rulemaking authority. I do think with even the small change of up to 500 that we will likely be okay. I think I'm okay with that, having that discretion written in that way, rather than going through the process of rules, which then of course will be subject to change and whatnot as administrations change. So.
On House Bill 80, Senator Boner. Senator Case. Senator Nethercott. Senator Scott. And Chairman Driscoll. On House Bill 80, it's 5 ayes, do pass amended.
Yeah, Senator Nethercott or-
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So good members of the Corporations Committee, as you might recall from our interim work, this bill was presented to us and asked for by the county clerks of our great state, recognizing some of the time crunches that they experience in their ability to prepare and process absentee ballots. I think we heard testimony, my recollection is we heard testimony about the increase in absentee ballots that the clerks received, particularly during the pandemic and throughout that time, and then the burden that they experienced with ability to count those timely and do it accurately in a way that they felt comfortable doing. And so they have requested that the committee support the changes associated with the timelines. And the substance of the bill is found, I believe, on pages 2 and 3 with that new language that you can see there. So, and it gives discretion to each clerk. So if you look at page 2, lines 20 through 23, so notwithstanding subsection B of this section, the county clerk may choose to prepare and process absentee ballots the Thursday or Friday immediately preceding election day, provided, so subject to the following conditions, that any county clerk electing to use this method of preparing and processing absentee ballots shall first notify the Secretary of State, so kind of a check and balance there. Romanet 2, the county clerk shall notify each political party of the date, time, and place that absentee ballot preparation and processing will occur. The notice shall include information on in-person observation of the process, including any procedures regarding the observation. Again, another layer of checks and balances for fairness. Romanet 3, no candidate or candidates committee, chairperson, or treasurer shall be allowed to observe the preparation and processing of absentee ballots under paragraph 2 of this subsection, further adding credibility and legitimacy to the process. Romanet 4, no results of absentee ballots prepared and processed under this subsection shall be known, printed, released, or provided to any person, and the results shall not be incorporated into the final vote count in any manner until after the polls close on election day. The importance of that clearly is to not influence the outcome of any election, to ensure, again, free and fair elections. And then turning the page to 4, Romanet 5. No person observing the preparation and processing or performing the preparation and processing of absentee ballots under paragraph 2 of this subsection shall be allowed to have in their possession any personal electronic device, except a device for medical necessity within 10 feet of the area where the preparation and processing is occurring at any time while preparation and processing is occurring. And a pretty smart and I think astute amendment there, recognizing how the process could be harmed by technology. And then Romanet 6, the Secretary of State shall adopt rules for the preparing and processing of absentee ballots under this subsection. Then moving on to the remainder of the bill, we go through that a violation of this act is subject to a felony. And I believe that the clerks are here and have provided us written support for the bill and are here to answer questions. And that's the bill, committee.
Come on up. Welcome. Glad to see you here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. They send their greetings today. They're at home working with their county commissioners because it's Commissioners Day. So you got me. I sent you a rather lengthy talking points sheet. Senator Nethercott has very presented our bill and has covered most everything that I would cover in those talking points. I have just a few small things I'd like to add. I studied the trends of absentee voting in the state of Wyoming over the past few years, starting with 2008, which was a presidential election year. At that point in time, we had 23% of our votes were cast by absentee. That represented 64,000 votes. In the 2016 election, another presidential election year was 28%. That represented 79,000 absentee votes. In the 2020 election, 46% of our votes were cast by absentee. That represented 143,000 votes that were cast absentee. And that's what's brought this discussion, not only the trend, but also the huge impact of the 2020 election on that process and the fact that Wyoming likes their election results on election night. And we don't have time if we're processing 46% of our votes. And some of our counties, I have county breakdowns that I looked at also. Some of our counties voted absentee in that percentage as well. Fremont County was one. They voted right at 46% absentee. Of course, we know that 2020 was influenced by COVID, but that doesn't mean, I don't think, as a good administrator of election, that you shouldn't be ready for that to happen again. This bill was designed to follow the directive that was issued by the Secretary of State's office to deal with this challenge that the clerk saw in 2020. And we support that. We've already started working on some procedures. It's local option. It's not required. Of that, there were 14 counties that used that local option, but there was 9 counties that did not. And the one example that we had in our information to you is Laramie County received little over 27,000 absentee ballots, and they chose to use that option. Platte County had 2,000 absentee ballots. They chose not to use that option. So it's local option. The other thing that is really we really like about this bill is that we're going to provide transparency to this process. When that processing room is set up, it's going to be just like a polling place, basically. You'll have 3 election judges, you'll have your machine, you'll have space available for poll watchers if you want, of course, without their electronics next to the machine. But some of those kinds of things. So, and again, local option determined by the clerk. to serve her constituency, his or her constituency, and with notice to the public, notice to the Secretary of State's office and to the parties, and be available during working hours as opposed to, I laughed on our talking points we talked about, to the early hours of the day. No, I think it's the late hours of the night. And as you saw too, there was great criticism in the last election season about vote dumps. So in the middle of the night, as you're watching your candidates on TV and now there's 10,000 more votes. Well, that's this. Do you want to see that in the middle of the night? There was a lot of consternation and concern about vote dumps. We want to be done on election night, and we've got a busy week that week. Commissioners, a lot of times will move their meeting from election day to Friday. Clerks are maybe in with commissioners on Friday of that week. Thursday, they're doing their canvass. They have to have results to the Secretary of State's office. We want to get done. And it's a lot of, if you want to continue to have your election results on election night. The concerns, I believe, also about the revealing the results of the election. This committee, when we developed this piece of legislation, they did include in there that, the results would be released to the county clerks, and they pushed back and said, we don't want to know results. We want those results to be captured in the voting machines, in the ballot box where the ballot lays. We have the option to close that poll or to shut that poll down. But at 7 o'clock on election night, when you turn the key and tell the polls to close, is when it tabulates and produces the reports. There's no way on the equipment, and we showed you a demonstration in Sheridan. I don't know if you really got to get a close-up look, and I don't think you did, but on the screen, there's a fairly large screen on all of the new election equipment, and what it tallies is it tallies how many ballots have gone into the machine. So you may be number 14 and the next one's number 15, but it never shows any races. It never shows any numbers, just what number ballot that is, so that everything can balance through the poll book, through the ballots, and through the machine. So we encourage you to support this bill. We support the amendments that were added on the House. And I know we've had the discussion about the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony and prosecuting election laws, but we're fine with that. And I'm ready for any questions, and we appreciate your support.
Question from Ms. Langford. Thank you. I've got one, and it's actually off the bill almost. In this top page 4, the electronic device. I assume that's normal procedure for the rest of the outside of this bill. Before, you don't allow electronic devices up close to where you're at where the absentee count's happening.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Further
Mr.
questions,
Chairman.
committee? Further questions? Thank you. We very much appreciate the work that you all do. And
Thank
the
you.
work on this bill. It's much appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, we really appreciate your support.
Anyone in the audience wish to testify? Mr. Winnie? No. Ms. Sean, why don't you come up first? I got to be ahead, that's for sure. Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kai Schoen, Election Director in the Secretary of State's office. House Bill 52, it is a bill that really is in line with the directive that we worked on in 2020. And so we certainly support the clerks on this bill. It really does provide for a very transparent process of how absentees will be processed, being open to the public. The fines that are associated with the felony charges seem appropriate. And so our office has incredible faith in the counties and their staff to execute the specifics of this bill. And I would answer any questions the committee might have.
Mr. Sean. Thank you. Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I voted by absentee ballot for nearly 30 years of my career in the Navy. Interestingly, Mary Langford was the county clerk for much of that. I found the system very capable, flexible, You do have to plan ahead. For instance, I have been at sea where you couldn't put something in the mail for as long as 110 days at one stretch. But once you get something in the mail, the military overseas mail anyway, it moves pretty quick. I've seen stuff get from Yokosuka, Japan, near Tokyo, to Pinedale faster than it gets from Bondurant to Cheyenne. And so the system works pretty good. At the end of the day, though, I would hazard a guess that a military member needs about 3 weeks from when they file their registration to vote. The federal postcard application goes to the county, send the ballot back, goes to the county. That process probably ought to be about 3 weeks minimum, just for perspective for y'all. But subject to your questions, thank you very much.
Mr. Wenning, see none, thank you. Anyone else in the audience? See none. Anyone online? None. Public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Senator Scott. Okay, sure.
Ask either the Secretary of State's office or Langford, page 3, lines 13 through 16. This is the one that says that you can't have when you're counting early, you can't have a candidate or candidates committee treasurer to observe. Do you ever have them in current counting processes?
Ms. Langford, welcome back.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, the discussion that revolved around that part of the law is that they didn't want candidates or their campaign committees to be involved in counting ballots. And typically we do not, and the example that I can give you is you're getting your election board ready to go, your judges, and you have a commissioner's wife or relative that's on your election board. It's customary that those folks beg off that election, that they don't participate, mostly because you're concerned about any kind of impropriety, but you're also concerned about the look and the appearance that there might be campaigning going on or those kinds of things. That's the reason, and the discussion that we had was that they didn't want candidates or their campaign leadership to be in the processing room at the time.
Senator Scott.
Do you get party officials representing the parties sometimes watching?
Sometimes, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if we had problems, you might be concerned about the lack of observers. In this state, the way our county clerks are so fierce about the integrity of the elections, it doesn't worry me in the slightest, this provision.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Any further discussion? Question? Roll call.
On House Bill 52 engrossed, Senator Boner, Senator Case, Senator Nethercott, Senator Scott, and Chairman Driscoll.
Aye.
The 2 ayes, 1 no, pass on House Bill 52 engrossed.
Thank you. We'll start into House Bill 49, election reporting requirements. Do we have somebody that wants to present? I'm not sure. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the committee may recall, this is another one of our joint committee bills, House Bill 49, election reporting requirements. I think this bill requires a significant amount of our effort, so I'm glad that we have a little bit more time saved up to review this bill thoughtfully. I think this was a bill that was flagged by many attorneys that we heard from in public comment and LSO that it might have some legal challenges associated with it. So I do think it deserves some significant attention as we move forward. I share some of those legal concerns, but I also share the intent of the bill. So I think we're going to need to do some work to kind of match that up. So again, the onus of this bill starts on page 2 with the new language under definition statement of formation. So any organization that receives contributions or expends funds in excess of $1,000 for the purpose of causing an independent expenditure or electioneering communication to be made shall file a statement of formation for the purpose of reporting political expenditures. The statement shall be filed in those offices as provided in 22-25-107. And here are the requirements for what that statement should include. The statement for the purpose of the formation, the name and mailing address of the organization, the name and mailing address of the organization chairman and treasurer, if applicable, or the organization's designee. Date the organization was formed and the purpose of the organization. Romanet 2, any organization supporting or opposing any initiative or referendum petition or any ballot proposition shall file a statement of formation for the purpose of reporting political expenditures within 10 days of receiving or expending any funds for the purpose of supporting or opposing any initiative. And then Romanet 3. So this is broad for who this covers and the purposes for what it covers. And this continues how broad that is in Romanet 3. Any organization that causes or intends to cause, so intends to cause an independent expenditure or electioneering communication to be made in any primary, general, or special election shall file a statement of formation, similar as we've seen for all of the others. And so as we move through the bill on page 4, we can see the definition for an electioneering communication, which is not new in our laws. It exists, but for reference to this bill. And then moving on to the new language, good senators, page 7, line 20, organization is the new language added. Means any corporation, partnership, trade union, professional association, or civic, fraternal, or religious group, or other profit or nonprofit entity, or any other entity influencing an election, except a candidate's campaign committee, political action committee, or political party. So that is in essence the bill. The reports that are required to be provided by these entities are subject to a penalty of perjury provision as found on page 13, Romanet K, or paragraph K, where the reports are to be filed, going on to page 13 through 14. And it indicates it's beyond the Secretary of State's office, but it says all reports required under this chapter shall be filed as follows. Any candidate for a municipal, county, judicial, school, or college board office, and any political action committee or candidate's campaign committee supporting such a candidate, supporting or opposing a municipal initiative or referendum, or any organization that causes an independent expenditure or electioneering communication to be made within the county shall file with the county clerk. So a unique piece there that not all of these reports will go to the Secretary of State's office and will go to the county clerks. Failure to file, again, we see on page 14, line 20, $500 per day. Same process as we just discussed in House Bill 52 or House Bill 80. That same process there. And again on page 15. So really good, senators, what we recall here is that trying to capture some of the electioneering communications that we've seen in our state by some of those out-of-state mystery groups that participate in our elections, and it's unclear who they are, where they're from, and what their purposes are, and how much they're spending on our elections. And so this is a way to capture that in response to observing that in our state's elections here recently.
Senator Nethercott. Questions for Senator Nethercott? Sean, would you like to come back up one more time? We as well have you just stay. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, members of the committee, Kai Schoen, Election Director in the Secretary of State's office. And thank you, Senator Nethercott, for that review of the bill summary. House Bill 49, election reporting requirements. It's a bill that does provide a more streamlined process that seeks to assist organizations with meeting their statutory filing obligations that currently exist in law. And again, at the same time, providing just greater transparency to the public on who these organizations are before or shortly thereafter an electioneering communication or independent expenditure is made. And the bill achieves this through the requirement for organizations as defined within this bill, causing them to form. And as long as they're intending or expending $1,000 for any primary, general, or special election. Organizations, they're uniquely different. We've had some of this discussion before, and this bill really does seek to or attempt to take into account their uniqueness in a way that is not egregious or unreasonable. It really creates a logical workflow for organizations that already exist for PACs and candidate committees where they form and then they file. And so it does give them that same process. The benefit to that for organizations, as we've already discussed here this morning, is it allows organizations now to get into the system, if you will, so that our office, and if there's any organizations that are doing this activity within the counties, to form, and we have their information. So now we can notify them, just like we notify each of you on this committee, as well as PACs and parties of their filing requirements that are upcoming. And so it's a process of helping really assist these organizations to meet again their existing statutory requirements to file. And that's kind of just some simple remarks that I have about this bill, and you may have questions. So I would certainly do my best to answer any questions the committee may have.
Another cut.
Thank you, Mr. Schoen, and also committee members. The legal concerns, I think we were told that there were constitutional concerns. If Mr. Schoen, do you recall those, or are you aware of some of those challenges that have been presented to the bill? Can you maybe remind us of what those are?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I wish I had brought the memo with me. There was an LSO memo that you may have all been privy to as well that did talk about this relationship with organizations and campaigning. And the issue was around having organizations, I think the term was register, prior to doing the filings. And I don't know all the very specifics of it, but I do know that in the review of it, the summary, if you will, of LSO's memo did say the way that this is written would likely stand up in the conversation that's happened within the courts, looking at those cases and then looking at this bill and what it's requiring of organizations, that we may be threading that needle, if you will.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Schoen, welcome. To me, it comes down to this definition of organization, I think. It seems it's a really broad definition. So let's just go through it. Page 7, line 20. Organization means any corporation, partnership, trade union, professional association, or civic, fraternal, or religious group, or other profit or nonprofit entity, or any other entity influencing a election, with the 3 exceptions: a candidate's campaign committee, political action committee, or a political party. So the any other entity kind of bothers me. So this is like the boys at the coffee shop that get together and buy a radio ad for someone, or this could be a single person who takes out an ad in a newspaper expressing themselves one way or the other. It seems to me that they're caught up in this. And anyway, is that true? Is that what I'm reading? Am I wrong?
I'll make my first attempt. It's $1,000. So if it's me putting an ad in up to $500 in the local paper or whatever, I'm exempt from it. But it's when you exceed the 1,000, which is that correct, Ms. Sean? Am I correct in my interpretation?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct in your interpretation about the $1,000 threshold. Absolutely. And if I could address Senator
Please.
Case's comments on that, as far as an individual, because there's obviously First Amendment rights and free speech, and so it doesn't fiddle with that, if you will, an individual functioning that capacity. And as far as if there was more than one individual, you and your friend, or however it would be, if you were trying to organize to support or oppose, a candidate or a particular ballot proposition or something of that nature, that falls under the definition of a PAC. And so that's where they would come into the scope, would be as a PAC, not as an entity as described in this organization. And so hopefully that addresses that.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up? I'm not really sure. Let's just take the lowest possible combination. Would be two people that are upset about something and they agree to buy a full page ad and it costs $1,200 and they both kick in half the money. Are they covered by this?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, two individuals that are organizing to, again, support or oppose a candidate or a proposition.
To buy a newspaper ad?
To buy a newspaper ad.
Mhm.
It doesn't expressly address that here.
So, Mr. Chairman, and the answer is they are caught up in this. They would be. Yes, right?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I think you're right on that.
Okay.
Thank you. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's certainly a very important bill we have to be careful with. Just, I guess, extrapolating along some of the concerns we just heard, it does cast a very broad net, but there's also, there's $1,000 limitation. There's also the definitions of independent expenditure and electioneering communication. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. That's both those definitions are related basically to a specific candidate and specific races. So say a religious organization is doing issue-based advocacy, they would not be copied. Say they have billboards all up and down the interstates, well in excess of $1,000 that they deal with a particular political issue that they feel strongly about, but not necessarily a candidate. They would not be caught up in this. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, thank you for that clarification and that question. And they would not. It's not an issue-based relationship.
Good question, Ms. Shaw. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that distinction is really important as we help our fellow senators, if the bill passes committee, understanding those distinctions there, because I think we'll probably go down that road, is to recognize that it isn't about, pro-life billboards on the highway, nor is it about pro-Second Amendment, websites year round, right? It's only those electioneering communications intended to influence the outcome of some type of an election issue. So I think that's where that LSO memo, if my recollection is correct, I wish I had read it beforehand, and what Mr. Schoen had identified as threading that needle carefully. I think we are, walking dangerously into those waters. And so threading that needle very carefully here is important. So this conversation, I think, is prudent. Senator Case, continue challenging us. I want to make sure this bill is lawful.
Thank you. I tend to go down the same path but I'm a little different is if two people can put 600 apiece in an ad, now what do we do when 12 people come together and do 8,000 in an ad? And to me, I'm one of the ones that wants to cast a fairly broad net. Seems like every time we leave a crack in one of these, they find a way to run a herd of elephants through it. And so for me, I'd rather on a committee is be pretty serious about it. There's obviously some latitude without saying too much of who you go after on it. I mean, it's got to be fairly gregarious, I believe, in the way I see it. Does that potentially fit in? You folks are the ones that do it. So you take the first look at whether it actually is two guys in the barber shop or a bunch of people trying to do it. Is that correct, Mr. Sean?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. If we become aware of that type of activity and we have a vehicle to reach out to them and clarify, then that is something we do, yes.
Ms. Sean, is it usually generated by a complaint or do you guys proactively go out and hunt for this?
Mr. Chairman, it's usually generated by a complaint, someone that becomes aware of it and lets our office know.
Senator Scott.
Mechanically, in the bill on page 14, we have 2225 108, which is also identically in the previous bill. So but my understanding is that the change we made in that's in the previous bill, that's in 22-25-106 is not duplicated in this bill. Is that correct? Did I miss something?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, no, you're exactly right. It's the same section of law, but not changed the way the committee just changed 80.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we've got to be consistent on, I think, 22-25.
Correct, Senator Scott. We also have a $200 one on the next page for county clerks, so you're probably gonna want to do the same one.
Okay.
If you go to page 15, if you go outside the Secretary of State, now you're at $200 on county clerks. So you're probably gonna want to do a double amendment should you do that. Committee. Testimony from the audience. Seeing none. Anybody online? Any parting comments before I close public testimony? Means I jumped the last time. Public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, back on the bill amendments. Would you like it on both sections or one? Okay. Same amount. Up to on page, yeah.
On page 14, line 24, secretaries, we all understand what the
Yep.
amendment is, but for our secretaries, you have to do the work.
Right.
Page 14, line 20, to add the up to language. And then also on page 15, line 2, that same up to language of up to $200 for our clerks.
We have that. Perfect. Thank you. Been moved. Any discussion on the amendments? Question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Amendments passed. Any further amendments or discussion on the bill?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
What I'd like, I don't think I can get past the committee, but what I'd like is some recognition that that casual entities banding together would be not covered by this bill. Incidental ads or things like that from individuals or two people working together or something like that. But I don't think I can figure out how to do that. And I don't think the committee likes that, but I'm not sure.
I'll opine just a tiny bit. I actually don't mind the two-person deal because it kind of gets around it as long as it's, 500 a piece type deal up to $1,000. I'm fine. A couple of people's fine by me, but creating loopholes, if we go down that path, I think it's got to be really narrowly defined. I am willing to spend some time. We'll hold this open if you want to work on amendment, or we can bring one on the floor. You seem to have an aversion to leaving out a committee, and I'm one of the ones that I guess I'm a different chairman, as I'm not opposed to. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, what if we said on page 7, line 23, where it says, or any other entity, insert the words expending more than $500 or $250 or some specific figure influencing? And that would, the people in the coffee shop get together and put up a sign or.
Senator Scott's there. When you go back a couple pages, it's $1,000. It's there. It's
1,000.
already there. It's
It's already there.
So
Okay.
it's back, and I think thousands, unless papers and things change, $1,000 is quite a bit of money on electioneering. It's actually a pretty, gives you a pretty good shot. Senator Case.
Well, Mr.
Especially in a small town, Mr. Chairman.
Help me out, and I already forgot something, so I apologize. This could be redundant, but individuals are not covered. So and a guy could spend $50,000 fighting free speech, no reports, nothing. So if two individuals get together and they coordinate together, but they have their expenditures be individualized, I'll buy the ad in this paper, you buy the same ad in this paper. That looks like a coordinated pack thing, but that would be exempt, right? But if the same two people got together and said, all right, let's put our money in a bank account and then let's pay out of that account both these ads, or they both paid half of each ad, then they're covered. That's kind of ridiculous to me. I'm trying, I just don't get that.
Is there another comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Case's concerns are warranted that we will always have, in that scenario, bad actors intending to evade the law. And my criminal justice background, this is a continuing effort, right, where the laws and those that enforce them are constantly trying to understand how to ensure legal conduct occurs. So, there's some pragmatic concerns. One is how would anyone ever know, right, that you have two people intending to evade the law? I would urge great caution if I were those two people who were choosing to expend more than $1,000 and trying to evade the law, that although maybe technically they're adhering to it, they still might run afoul of the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General. So I don't know that that's entirely clear. But you're right, Senator Case, the one guy who wants to put $1 million into a Wyoming congressional race certainly can, and I think certainly does, and certainly will. So there's nothing we can really do about that in light of that First Amendment piece, which is fundamental to our democracy, but we're doing the best we can here, I think.
But Mr. Chairman,
Is there a case?
we need to just finish this out, but in light, that's a First Amendment protection, the individual. But in the First Amendment, it also protects the ability to assemble to petition. So wouldn't it be just as strong that you can band together wouldn't it be the same as the individual's standard? This is the part that escapes me.
I'll weigh in a tiny, and I guess to me, there's two different layers of it. One, anybody smart enough to hand a check to someone else to evade if they want. Second, I think we got a level of protection put in there. It's back to the $500 fine. There's the two guys. It's the same process. Yeah. They come in, they go to the Secretary of State and say, we didn't understand what we were doing, and we understand we went past. In the worst case is they file their grievance, and I think Secretary of State says, we agree. It's not egregious. We're going to waive the fine and let you go, but you're on notice. Because it usually is, and that was my question, generated by complaint. Someone's calling foul somewhere because of the way it was done. And I think this is a great step to get there. It doesn't solve the problems, but it's a great step. Senator Boner.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Chairman. I think that, looking on page 7, line 23, I think that language of or any other entity, it might be what's tripping us up. And I'm just wondering, does that, every other part of that definition doesn't even come close to, pointing towards an individual. At some point, it seems like all these entities at some point would be registered with the Secretary of State's office for, business registration, if nothing else. And so I'm just wondering, this is a question for the committee. I don't know the answer, honestly. Does that language actually catch up individuals? Or what's the purpose of that language or any other entity? And do we need it, I guess, is, if it's causing confusion, if it's causing concern. And the second question is, does it actually catch up individuals like we're talking about?
Senator Nethercott.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Sean addressed this question, so maybe have him come back up and address it again. I think that's helpful. And for some humor, I'm just waiting for a Russian amendment here. If there ever was an appropriate Russian amendment interfering in electioneering communications, it might be now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Boner. So as far as an individual, they're not wrapped up in that specific definition of organization. If I could read the definition of political action committee, just so maybe that's clear in our
Please,
minds as
you've
well.
got great latitude.
A political action committee means any group of 2 or more persons organized and associated for the purpose of raising, collecting, or spending money for use in the aid of or otherwise influencing or attempting to influence directly or indirectly the election or defeat of candidates for public office, candidate committees, or political parties for support of or opposition to any initiative or referendum petition drive, or for the adoption or defeat of any ballot proposition. So once two get involved, it's pretty specific.
We're pretty
Being a
clear
pact.
now. It doesn't matter what we do with the law,
And that's current statute, right?
correct. Further question, Ms. Schoen? Thank you. That was a great clarification. Committee, any further amendments? Any further amendments? Back to the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Last word, Senator Case. Question being called on the bill. Roll call.
On House Bill 49 engrossed, Senator Boner, Senator Case, Senator Nethercott, Senator Scott, Chairman Driscoll. And House Bill 49, 4 ayes, 1 no, do pass amended.